Hi, first grade friends, Mrs. Brand here, and today for our social emotional learning activity, I wanted to read you a story. This story has a lesson that can be learned from it. So as I'm reading, I want you to think about what is it that we can learn from this story. And our book today is called The Invisible Boy, and it's illustrated by Patrice Barton and written by Trudy Ludwig. So The Invisible Boy. Here's our title page. I know my friends in my class, we've been talking about what a title page is. Here we go. Can you see Brian, the invisible boy? Even Mrs. Carlotti has trouble noticing him in her classroom. She's too busy dealing with Nathan and Sophie. Nathan has problems with what Mrs. Carlotti calls volume control. He uses his outside voice inside too much. Sophie whines and complains when she doesn't get her way. Nathan and Sophie take up a lot of space. Brian doesn't. When the bell rings for recess, Micah and JT take turns choosing kids for their kickball teams. The best players get picked first, and then the best friends of the best players, and then the friends of the best friends, and only Brian is left, still waiting and hoping. JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. We've got enough players for each team, he tells the others. Let's play ball. What happened to Brian? He didn't get chosen at all. That's not very kind, is it? In the cafeteria, Madison and her friends talk about her birthday party. The rope swing over the pool was awesome, says JT. Yeah, so was the water slide, adds Fiona. That was the best pool party ever. I'm so glad you guys had fun, said Madison. Everybody did, except for Brian. He wasn't invited. I feel so bad for Brian. At choosing time while the other kids played board games and read, Brian sits at his table doing what he loves to do best. He draws fire-breathing dragons, scaling tall buildings, greedy pirates digging for treasure, space aliens locked in intergalactic battles, and superheroes with the power to make friends wherever they go. And he says, hi friend, I have a cookie. Crackers? Arr! Yay! I got you now. Thank you for toasting my marshmallows. He's a pretty good drawer, too. On Monday morning, Mrs. Carlotti introduces Justin, a new student to the class. Brian smiles shyly at him. Some of the other kids sneak looks at Justin, trying to figure out if he's cool enough to be their friend. They haven't quite made up their minds yet. If you were Justin, how would you feel? I know I would be happy if Brian looked and smiled at me. At lunch, Madison and JT watched Justin eat with chopsticks. What's that? Asked Madison as she points at Justin's food. And then he tells her it's bulgogi. I might be saying that wrong. Bula what? Bulgogi. It's Korean barbecued beef. My grandma made it for me. It's really good. Do you want to try some? There's no way I would eat booger-G. And the kids all laughed. All of them, that is, except for Brian. He sits there wondering which is worse, being laughed at or feeling invisible. The next day, when Justin goes to his cubby to put away his backpack, he notices a piece of paper with his name on it. Justin, I thought The Bulagogi looked good, Brian. At morning recess, Brian finds a piece of chalk on the ground and starts drawing away. You're right, Brian, right? I'm sorry, you're Brian, right? Yeah, thanks for the note. Hey, Justin, Emilio calls out from the tetherball court. You're up next. Sorry, I gotta go, says Justin. By the way, that's a really cool drawing, he adds before taking off. How do you think that made Brian feel when Justin came over? Are you noticing something? I just noticed this about Brian. Look at the way Brian looks here compared to the way Brian looks here. Do you notice anything? He has some more color to him. I wonder if he has more color because he's starting to feel happy and more included. Let's see. Back in class, Mrs. Carlotti asked the kids to team up in 2s or 3s for a special project. The kids scurry around the room to pair off. Brian heads towards Justin. I'm already with Justin, says Emilio. Find someone else. Brian looks at the floor, wishing he could draw a hole right there to swallow him up. Mrs. Carlotti said we can have up to 3 people in a group. We're only 2. Come on, Emilio, let him work with us. Okay, I guess. So look at the color of Brian as he changes throughout these pictures. Do you notice the difference? Mrs. Carlotti gives the class directions for the project. Your assignment is to work together to write a story about what you see in that photograph. Use your imagination and have fun. Whoa, cool, says Emilio. What kind of people do you think live in houses like that? I don't know, but I bet Brian could draw them to go with our story, says Justin. Brian smiles as he takes out his lucky pen. How do you think he's feeling right now? Notice he's all in color. And look at his face. I think he's pretty excited. Oh. So here they are working on their project. And then it says the crooked story we made up on the spot. So then there they are presenting their project. It's lunchtime again. Brian's least favorite part of the day. After 20 long minutes of kids talking and laughing with everyone else but him. Brian, he hears someone shout. Hey, Brian, over here. Brian turns and sees Justin waving him over. Emilio nods at Brian as he makes room for him at the table. That was very kind of them, right? To invite him over to sit. Do you think Emilio is starting to change his way of thinking about Brian now that Justin has kind of encouraged him to let Brian hang around? Do you think Emilio's, maybe his view of Brian is changing? Cookie? Thanks. Maybe, just maybe, Brian is not so invisible after all. Okay, and that's the end of our story, The Invisible Boy. So here's some questions I want you to think about. Oh, but first, I want you to think, I told you to try to think of something that we can learn from the little boy in our story. So I want you to tell the adult around you, what is it that we can learn from Brian, Justin, and Emilio in our story? I think there's a lesson that we can learn in regards to how we should treat each other, right? And then here are some more questions if you want to have the adult nearby if they can listen and see if your answers are right, if they listen to the story too. Okay, so I want you to think about, how did Micah and JT choose the players for their teams? So remember when they were they at recess, or were they, oh yeah, they were at recess for their kickball teams. Do you remember how they chose their players on their team? If you were going to choose players for a team, how would you choose your players? Would you do it differently, or would you do it similarly to the way that those kids did? And then another question I want you to think about, and this goes with our theme of our story, is, have you ever intentionally excluded or not invited other kids from joining your group or your game or an activity you were doing? So have you ever done that and treated somebody like they treated Brian? And it's okay if you have, okay? I know I have. It's not the right thing to do, but it's something that I can now notice and that I can change and be for the better, and treating other people the way I would want to be treated. So thank you for listening to our story today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, friends.